Voices have a strong meaning. They share what the eyes cannot see. Voices echo, encourage, empower, and support.
Welcome to the Listening to One Another to Grow Strong podcast series.
We are inviting you to embark with us on a journey in the work and reflection of the Listening to One Another to Grow Strong program, or LTOA for short.
LTOA is a strength-based, community-driven, and culturally adapted program for Indigenous families and youth. The program is rooted in the principle that family well-being is a cornerstone of individual and community wellness.
The program originates out of a collaboration between First Nations communities in British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and research teams based out of McGill University.
In the delivery and research of LTOA, we are following the different stages of the implementation cycle to learn more about what works, how it works, and how it works for.
This podcast series is based on exchanges with partners of the LTOA program and will help us learn more about the implementation cycle.
We hope to foster community engagement and connection by listening to each other's stories, passions, and work around the LTOA program.
We believe this podcast can help us gain insight on how the program works on the ground, and it will allow us to learn from the different individuals involved in the program to grow stronger and inspire people around us.
We are your hosts, Nicole,
Tristan,
and Caroline.
Join us while we discuss cultural adaptation and discover how LTOA community partners have taken ownership of the program.
Welcome to the second episode of the Listening to One Another podcast series. My name is Caroline Beck. I will be your narrator and guide today. Come with me while we follow a discussion among the LTOA core research and implementation team. As a newest member of the LTOA team, I had the privilege of interviewing my colleagues and talk about different aspects of programming in the Listening to One Another to Grow Strong project during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had quite a long conversation, so we decided to divide the episode in two parts. The first part that you're listening to right now focuses on implementation during the COVID-19 pandemic. The second part will present reflection on research, ethics, and positionality. To start us off, we welcome Dr. Lawrence Kirmayer, a James McGill professor and director of the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry at McGill University. Dr. Kirmayer is a principal investigator of the Listening to One Another to Grow Strong project. Dr. Kirmayer, can you please introduce the LTOA project to our listeners?
Well, Listening to One Another to Grow Strong is a mental health promotion program for Indigenous youth and their families. It started through an initiative between myself and colleagues in Indigenous communities we were working with, who were concerned to go beyond a lot of the research that was being done to try to identify risk and protective factors and different things that contributed to mental health and well-being. We'd done a large study on resilience, for example, and communities felt strongly they needed help and support in doing some kind of positive intervention that would promote strength. And the Public Health Agency of Canada made available funds for implementation research, which means really looking at how programs get developed and implanted, how they actually get delivered in different places. So we were able to develop an approach to this mental health promotion program that we call LTOA for short, that is based on an earlier program developed in the United States, especially for rural communities and youth, called Strengthening Families. And that program was really based on the idea that having good communication in families, having good parenting skills, providing a supportive environment, providing boundaries and structure and so on, all those ingredients in good family life was kind of the best way to help youth develop, to grow strong and healthy. And it also intended to reduce the risk of youth developing problems related to substance use, to drug and alcohol use, and so on. So that was a major concern with that program. And it had been shown in some studies to actually be effective, to actually be helpful and make a difference. So we took the skeleton or the framework and some of the content of that program, but turned it into something that could be adapted to the very particular contexts of Indigenous communities. And in particular, to make it centered on the culture and the values and the perspectives of those communities. So the idea is, if there's some good ideas in this program and in other mental health practices that people can make use of, they need to be translated or transformed or rethought in ways that really fit the local values, the language, the worldview, the perspectives, the nature of family life, the nature of the community of First Nations and other Indigenous communities. So rather than just making a single cultural adaptation as though all First Nations communities are the same, we know that that's not true, that there's lots of variation, even if people have shared some common challenges historically and even into the present. So we wanted to design it in such a way that each community or each region or each First Nations could make its own version of the program, essentially. And what they would keep constant is the basic goals of different sessions and the overall program. That is to strengthen well-being, to help youth and their parents and caretakers to have a strong sense of their own identity, their own cultural identity, their own community identity, their own personal identity, and to give them some skills for dealing with different kinds of challenges, dealing with difficult emotions, dealing with bullying, being able to, say no when somebody encourages you to do something that's not healthy for you, being able to think through things in a way that's helpful. So some of the basic ingredients of mental well-being that are present in every community, but that young people need sometimes help and encouragement to develop in a strong way. And not only the individual young people, but their whole families. So the LTOA program presents some of those kinds of ideas, but after it's been culturally adapted by the community, it presents those things in a way that is very much in the local language and the local perspectives of the community. So people see a reflection of their own values, their own worldview, at the same time as they're maybe being reminded or getting some new ideas about how to deal with certain kinds of challenges in life and in growing up to be healthy and strong.
So, as you can imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic presented unprecedented barriers for community-driven mental health promotion programs like the LTOA. Due to restrictions, Indigenous community partners across Canada have been unable to deliver the LTOA program. With programming on temporary pause, the LTOA team reflected on the need to strengthen and expand the LTOA community of practice. But what is a community of practice exactly? What does it look like in the LTOA project? Let's listen to the team.
So actually, I've been quite new to the program. I started in the summer 2020, and I've been noticing in conversation with you guys, and when I read the program newsletters, website, there's the expression of community of practice comes back a lot. And I was wondering if for a listener, you could explain what is a community of practice and what does it look like in LTOA case? Nicole, yeah, of course. So for listeners, Nicole, you're the research coordinator of the program, and you've been working with LTOA for 5 years now in implementation and now mainly in research capacity. So I'll let you go.
Okay, great. So basically, the way we have come to define community of practice in the program is that it's a group of people who share a common passion, interest, or concern. And the idea is that through the LTOA program, we foster connections between different communities and different processes that are taking place both at the community level and then also in terms of research. So in the LTOA program, the community of practice can extend from best practices on the ground in the implementation of the program, and also what are some of our research practices that we're partaking in having the program understood better in its processes, its impact, and its outcome. So a community of practice brings together scholars and practitioners into this space.
That's very cool. Thank you for this. Michaela, I can see you wanted to add something You've been a research assistant for over 3 years now of the program, and Michaela has been part of both research and implementation, and especially training of partners and outreach of the program.
Yeah, so in building a community practice, it's something that we had started a few years ago, and one of our first steps was making and creating a quarterly newsletter. So this was something that was first initiated in spring of 2019. And at the time, we had our creative genius, Mia, around. So she did a beautiful job on the first one. And yeah, it's just like something that I think it's enjoyable to put together. I think it's helpful to reflect on, because it's quarterly, you have that reflection every couple of months of what has happened, what is coming up, and to be able to share that with anyone who's interested in, like, it's not just for LTOA partners, it's also for the greater community practice, right? We have like a listserv going of people who have expressed interest in the program, and it also goes out within the networks that Dr. Kirmayer is part of as well. So in our newsletters, you'll typically find our work for the LTOA program. So on both the research and implementation side of it, sometimes we'll have little descriptions of training sessions. Like Michelle and I wrote one when we went to the PAW, which was very fun and very cold. It's like -50 when we were there. But that was a really exciting thing to talk about and share. And then we also kind of bring up anything that is relevant within the research realm. So Tristan's toolkit will be featured, or his work on the toolkit will be featured in the next newsletter. And that's something that we are hoping to get out very soon. And then, of course, we love highlighting the amazing LTOA partners. So we do spend some time on the phone. We try to do like a spotlight of the month or the newsletter, and call up one of our partners and have a chat and talk about their engagement with the program, and also just about their personal life. I think we use that also as a way to catch up with each other and connect, and it's always a really great experience to do that. And yeah, Michelle, anything to add in terms of the social media?
Actually, Michelle, you're the national coordinator of the LTOA project. You've been in charge of the implementation of the program as well as funding and administration for 2 years now.
Yeah, well, I think, the creation of the newsletter was really just a way to sort of solidify and strengthen the community of practice, and to share not only what is coming out of the central team in McGill, but also what our partners are doing on the ground, and the successes and their accomplishments throughout this program, and sort of to harness a little bit more of that energy. We've really tried to get onto social media and take advantage of each of those platforms. We originally had, a Facebook group that was sort of like a bit like a family, where people who had been through the program or facilitators could use this space as an opportunity to connect and to share experiences from the program, but it was more of a closed group. So we now have, a page where people can just access basic information on the program, connect with us. So we've hopefully that will create a larger presence within Facebook. We know we've gotten on the Instagram train, the Twitter train, and really, trying to understand how each of those platforms are used, and, what specific audience each of those platforms target. So we're really trying to take advantage of the data that comes from each of those platforms, and how we can better engage, communities and partners or new partners, academics, other community organizations, to get the word out about LTOA. Much like, I think we're continuing to learn how to best engage and utilize each of these platforms. So it's definitely a work in progress, but we're so fortunate to have Leah, who came to this program under the Global Mental Health Program, really take a lead on this, and sort of teach us all about some of the strengths that come from these different platforms. So again, definitely a work in progress, but we're happy to be on these different platforms to share different aspects of the program. Yeah.
Like, I think Instagram over time is becoming the newer thing. It's more accessible, it's more engaging, so that we've seen like tremendous growth in the last few months, especially with Leah at the helm. It's been really great.
Newsletter and social media can be such a great tool for organizations. I asked the team next if their approach to social media changed since the COVID-19 pandemic started.
I think now more than ever, this sort of outreach or these ways to foster connection and community is like more important during the pandemic.
One of the biggest aspects of the community of practice, especially during COVID-19, has been in fostering connection. And now that we don't have the ability to be face-to-face, to interact with communities, to interact even with each other in the team, the central team, we needed to, I guess, create spaces that would allow us to continue this work remotely. And I think although COVID-19 brings us with immense challenges of restriction and distancing, there's something to be said about some of the moments that it has created. Now more than ever, digital connection has been growing faster. We have been seeing each other in meetings more than we would have if we were in an office space or interacting by phone with communities. And our social media has been one of our main avenues of connecting with people during this time, and we've definitely grown from that.
Absolutely. I think we've also connected with other organizations too, which has been really great. We share each other's posts and like each other's things as well, and that kind of bridges connections within people who are doing the same work as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, in terms of online meetings and programming, I was wondering if some of you would like to talk about a bit of the partner meeting that has been happening with LTOA, and what does it look like to continue to build this relationship with partners?
Right. So I wanted to sort of backtrack just a little bit and talk just a touch about our two-eyed seeing evaluation gatherings that we have yearly. And, this is an opportunity for, community partners who've been associated with the program to come together in person, to connect, to learn from one another, to share experiences around the program, to talk about successes, barriers, etc. So, this is really where, the community of practice, I feel really stems from. And so we've thought about different ways that we can, continue, this connection, this vibe through partner meetings. And, we've used to do this by phone prior to COVID-19, but we've moved on to the virtual space using Zoom and other platforms where we can actually see each other. And so these partner meetings are essentially an extension of the two-eyed seeing evaluation gatherings that we would used to have in person each August in Montreal. But these meetings have allowed us to continue these connections, to share experiences around the program, if we're coming out with some new materials, or wanting to have some subgroups around building out toolkits, etc. These partner meetings have allowed us to have those conversations, but still at the core, like Nicole had said, it's really just about that connection. So we're still trying to figure out the right sort of pattern, if you will. How much do we meet, for how long, what format? We know that people are very busy, and we know that these we've all moved to these online spaces where we can have, meeting after meeting after meeting. So we do really want to be cognizant of our partner's time and ensure that we build up a safe space that, is meaningful as well. So we're still trying to, honestly figure out that format, but we're still happy to, host these meetings and offer that space for connection.
I think it's really great, and the fact that being able to do this and host these partner meeting gatherings, I've seen very exciting things happening here, and I really like sharing new materials, and I think it fosters really these types of interpersonal relationship that seems to be very important in LTOA. And when you were thinking, when you guys were speaking, it made me think of also some of the new connection that started to also exist thanks to the social media and participating to these partner meetings, and that leads to maybe new partnership. I was wondering if Michelle, you wanted to talk a bit about this and about how actually the pandemic and the fact that LTOA has been more present online maybe came to fruition with new relationship here.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to sort of go into a couple different avenues here. One being the opportunity I've had to connect with partners through our funding. The Pathy Family Foundation has started a peer-to-peer online gathering space where, each quarter we'll come together and connect and share, much like we would at our LTOA partner meetings, but we would come together with different organizations across Canada who are working with Indigenous communities specifically to come together to, sort of the same thing, connect and share experiences, talk about barriers, successes, etc., how to be an ally, an advocate, anywhere to, talking about cultural adaptation in programming, much like we would, to ensuring youth voice in programming. So that's been a really wonderful space that has actually, fostered many new connections with organizations that we have come to spotlight within our LTOA newsletter. And, it's also led me to, becoming part of this leadership course that, also is bringing together, Pathy partners who are working in the North, and we're talking about, conflict resolution to empathy to communication styles to leadership styles. And that's just been also a really good opportunity to build connections with people who are working on the ground with Indigenous communities. I will say that, these online spaces have allowed people to, take part in conferences or to take part in spaces that they may not necessarily would have had the opportunity to join into if they had to travel to this place or that place. So we actually had the opportunity to participate in the Indigenous Wellness virtual training conference. And Lawrence, myself, and our partner at CMMNS, Caitlin, joined in one of the sessions to talk about mental health programming. And Caitlin was able to share some information from the ground and some best practices from the ground. And that was really a good opportunity for us to talk about LTOA and really start to introduce it a little bit better in the East Coast, because that training conference was really centered around the East Coast and communities there. But we've had some really good success from that. We've had a couple people reach out to us to learn more about the program, and we've actually been able to secure 2 training opportunities with 2 community organizations. And I hope that that'll just be the start of something really, really good and be able to build up a really strong and resilient community of practice, if you will, in the East Coast. So very exciting stuff.
It is very exciting. And these new trainings will happen soon. How do you envisage online training? How have you been planning for this?
For sure. I love training. It is one of my favorite aspects of this position. And I love it because we can come together in a space and learn and share. And I really do get into it. I know, Michaela, you've seen me.
You're amazing. It's so fun. Like trainings are so fun. They have
And
every emotion that goes through it, and it's
that's
beautiful. It's a really great experience.
That's it. So I think that's one of the things that I really want to make sure still comes across in this virtual setting. So we try to make trainings as experiential as possible, where potential or future facilitators have the opportunity to think through and reflect what families and youth might feel while engaging in this program, and also what they will feel and accomplish as facilitators. So I'm really excited for it. I'm hoping that we can sort of carry through some of those amazing conversations and that vibe that I like to create during trainings. So after the conference, we've had 2 community organizations reach out to us, and we set up Zoom calls with each of those organizations to talk about how they wanted that program or the program training to look and feel. So we've really tried to embed their voice and their vision of the training into this virtual training atmosphere. So we've had those meetings and have set dates for those. We've got some follow-up meetings as well to ensure that we're on the right track. But for example, for our training with some new folks in Nova Scotia, we'll have elders and knowledge holders coming in to open up and close those meeting days. We'll also be partnering, having our partners, at CMMNS to come in and also share their experiences with the program to really start to, like I had mentioned before, to solidify and build those connections in the East Coast and their own sort of community of practice. So I think it's some really exciting stuff, and really looking forward to, training more people in this program. And I think that's just going to open up some big doors there. And I'm excited to share with you, hopefully maybe in another podcast about some more training. So
I think that's one of your strengths as a coordinator. I think Michelle always takes the time to learn what potential partners are looking for and building that into it. So it's sort of a co-created training experience and learning session.
Right. This is very exciting, and I'm looking forward to see and attend some of this training and to see what happens and how can LTOA create this vibrant and dynamic community of practice. Our discussion turned next to the podcast series, where we reflected about processes and the meaning of creating a podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, so I think as a lot of our activities have shifted because we're not in communities, we're not doing face-to-face trainings or research, we've had some more time to build our repertoire of our knowledge base, and to spend this time reflecting on the processes and information of the program. And so the podcast, like the newsletter, is another component of this knowledge translation and engagement with partners and also scholars in the area. And I think, Michelle, I remember when COVID-19 first started, we were planning a webinar series. And that was meant to be where, we send a Zoom link and everyone can join. And Michelle delivered the first series with success, and it was wonderful. But we realized there were some drawbacks with the webinar series. One of them was being timing. The webinar was a live series. We were trying to connect with communities and partners across the country, trying to account for different time zones, different schedules. And so it made it hard to be together in a space in a live mode. And so with the podcast, it makes it much easier because you don't necessarily need an internet connection. You can download the episodes at your own leisure. You don't need a scheduling aspect of this. There are episodes that come out and you can look at it whenever one likes. So it allows more access to the content. And so we're constantly, as Michelle had previously said, the process of working our way through the pandemic, both in terms of implementation work and also research, is a process of constant pivoting. It's experimental. You try something out. Does it work or does it not work? How does it work? Who does it work for? Let's take this information and then build something that works a little bit better. So we're constantly evolving from like version 1.0 to version 2.0. And with each iteration, there are new things that we learn in that process. And I mean, Carol, you're the one that has been behind the podcast. So maybe you can reflect on, now I get to be the question asker for 1 second. Maybe you can reflect on your transition into this team as, you just landed in Canada a couple months ago, and how it's been integrating within a team that has already existed and integrating with community partners.
I think it's been a very, I like using the word journey. I think it's been a very interesting journey to join the team during the summer and getting to know you. Also, I never met you, most of you in person. Nicole, you actually is the first one I actually met in person.
We live in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, because I arrived and she brought me cream cheese and bagels.
It's a must if you live in Montreal. If you haven't eaten a Montreal bagel, then you haven't lived to eat a bagel. I don't even know if that makes sense, but yeah, Montreal bagels are where it's at.
And really, I think it's been challenging at times to find a place in a close knit team, to really find which space you are going to be taking, and you don't want to take on someone's space also. So it's been really interesting going through the motions with this, and actually working on the podcast really enabled me to create this space, because I was not added to a project. I was actually creating something that didn't exist before, and I think that was really, really exciting. And I'll be honest here, I've never done a podcast before. I had never touched a recording software before this happened. So it's been really a learning process. And I apologize if some of the episodes, sometimes the sounds go haywire, because it's just, as you said, Nicole, it's really, we're all learning here. And I think it's really exciting to do so. And actually, in terms of building relationship, not only with the team, but also with community partners, working with the podcast enabled me to get in touch with community partners and having conversation with them. And I think it's been really the beginning of a relationship that is so important to be integrated, to really work with Indigenous communities and with community partners, is really starting to have a chat and talk, and over time develop trust and strengthen these relationships. I'm really excited to be part of this journey here, and to have been supported with all of you, to have been working in research with Nicole, to have been working in implementation with Michelle. And actually, one of the interesting things also that we've been working on is with Michelle also is we've been meeting weekly to go through the program, and she really helped me navigate several aspects of LTOA and get to know where does activity come from, and how would we deliver this, and how would it look like in training. Because if I'm here to help her facilitate training, knowing where it comes from and knowing how it is actually done in practice is really interesting. So I've been really grateful for this, and hopefully one day we'll be able to meet in person somewhere. So that would be also very very cool. So yeah.
I guess going back to the podcast thing, it also gave us an opportunity to meet new people as well that we wouldn't have originally met, because in our first podcast recording with Caitlin and Katie, the name Mary Louise came up and we were kind of asking, oh, who is that? And then, we got her contact information. We just reached out and said, we're doing this podcast. We'd love to hear from you and more of your work. And if you're willing to talk, we'd love to talk. And she said yes. So, able to reach out and grow networks and connections as well is a big part of it too.
Completely. She's a really beautiful person also. And yeah, really listen to the first podcast if you haven't listened to it yet.
A shameless plug to listen to the
Exactly.
first one.
Okay, so actually, when we've been talking a lot about harnessing technology and working with community partners, so we've been working together as a team and also with community partners across Canada, but also there's been some interesting work that has been ongoing with other partnership during COVID, and I was wondering if you guys wanted to talk about this new toolkit you developed.
Yeah, so I'll start, and maybe Michaela, you can jump in. So part of the work in LTOA has been developing resources and toolkits, and with the advent of the pandemic, we were trying to figure out, okay, well, we can't meet face-to-face for programming, so how can we use existing resources that are easily available and widely available for everyone to use to mobilize ways of interacting and connecting? And so most recently, we came out with a toolkit called Mobilizing Technologies. I don't know the exact title, but when maybe Michaela, you can jump in.
The toolkit's name, the full name, and I understand why you forgot the whole of it because it is quite large, but it's Cell Phones, Connections, and Community, Harnessing Technologies to Foster Community Communication and Connection. So it was basically collaboration between the Listening to One Another program, the Institute for Human Development and Wellbeing at McGill, and the Participatory Cultures Lab at McGill. That I believe, Nicole, did you reach out to them, or how did that connection grow?
Yeah, so the way we came together is the PI of the Participatory Cultures Lab and the Institute for Human Development and Wellbeing is Professor Claudia Mitchell at McGill in the Department of Education. And her and I are currently on another project for asylum seeking and refugee mental health for families and youth. And so that project was just beginning when the pandemic hit. And we didn't even get a chance to do any programming in communities. So we were trying to think about how now, before we could even begin, before we could even meet anyone, do we pivot into a different realm of engagement? And so Claudia has a lot of summer interns that she gets each summer through the global health programs at McGill. And we too, for the past couple summers, we've been receiving a summer intern. In our case, it was Leah. And so between her team and LTOA, we decided to come together with the young people, because who knows technologies better than young people? And we spent weeks brainstorming on, okay, you're a community organization, you want to provide services, you can't meet. How do you do that? How do you do that with resources and tools you already have? And we decided, okay, a cell phone would be a resource everyone has that we can engage with and map out activities. And Michaela was actually the student on our team that took the lead on this project. So maybe Michaela, you want to run through a little bit more of that?
Yeah, so we started working together in May 2020 with the other team, and it was a really great process to just sort of figure out how to conceptualize this toolkit. Because we were also trying to hit the mark of it not necessarily being dependent on internet, although if you had internet that was helpful, but also just something that you could be doing creatively as well with your cell phone that could just be, if you could share it in like an online way, you could, but if not, just something that could be done and that community organizations could facilitate from a distance. So yeah, it was such it's a long process making a toolkit. I think I think we underestimated like the work that goes into it, because it's to make something very, good. And we thought also about the ethical considerations of, okay, like, as an organizer, like, it'd be also helpful to think about, you're asking people to upload things, like how to moderate that, how to think about that. So we really tried to make it as all-encompassing as possible, and something that can just like go out now to any community globally. It's not specific to the Canadian context. It's not specific to an Indigenous context. It's not specific to, it can be applied in a variety of communities and by a variety of organizations. And so we really tried to hit that mark where it was very accessible and something that could hopefully foster some connection.
Very cool. And, so this toolkit will be widely available and is available online as of now. So definitely something to check out.
Yeah.
We'll link below.
Yeah, link below. Definitely check it out and circulate to whoever you think would be interested. We're very proud of it. It took a lot of work, and it was a really great experience to work with the PCL lab and the Institute for Human Development and Wellbeing. They were great.
Let's conclude this episode with a reflection from Dr. Kirmayer.
Well, there's no doubt that the pandemic and the things that we've all been doing to try to slow the spread of the virus and be safe and get through this have had a profound impact on every aspect of life, and it's certainly the case for our program. The way this program works, each community is its own center of activity, that people are doing things locally, and they're doing them in their own local community centers and family life centers, or out on the land, or in different settings. But they're meant to be connected to each other, both in the region and across the country, so that Indigenous communities can share their experiences, share their wisdom, share their creative ideas about how to develop and deliver the program. That's always been the intention. The program, began with people who are involved with mental health and with, program development, kind of encouraging it along, but the goal has always been to produce enough material and enough raw material that people can work with, that we can sort of hand it off to the communities and to the regions, and people will just go with it, in the directions that are useful for them. To do that, we have to build a strong network or strong community of people who share interests in this area and are there to support each other. And in particular, the idea that different Indigenous communities could be supporting each other, both in their regions, like within a single First Nations, let's say, or neighboring nations, but even across the country, from the West Coast to the East and so on, that there's a lot that people could really share and really find interesting and encouraging. So we want people to make those connections. In the past, one of the main ways we've made those connections, we've had occasional teleconferences where people would sort of call in and we talk together. But one of the main ways we've done that is by having an annual meeting. Usually in Montreal, sometimes we've had it once in Winnipeg, we've had it in different places, where we try to bring people together, and we're together face to face for a couple of days, and we all share our experiences with the program, and people get to know each other and make friendships and feel that they can sort of, contact each other later to follow up and so on. So that's been our main vehicle. It's a slow process. It's an intense process, but because people make that commitment to come and spend the time together, it makes strong connections. The situation now with COVID really changes that. We can't bring people together for the time being in the same way. That's the downside. The upside is that theoretically, at least, it's very easy to connect. We're all just a phone call away, or a Zoom call, or a Skype call, or whatever we use online. So ideally, that should mean that it's easy for all of us to connect. However, everybody's also kind of saturated with spending time on Zoom and spending time on video. So after the initial novelty wore off of being able to see somebody far away and have a video conference, which seems kind of, to me, when I was a child, this was like science fiction of the distant future, that we'd have video conferences. Now we have them on our watch or our phone, never mind in a conference room. But the reality, as I say, is that we're all kind of, filled with too many opportunities, too much time on the screen. And it's obviously not the same thing. even if you spend an hour chatting with somebody on the screen, it's not the same thing as being in the physical presence of someone, of being able to talk together, being in the same place, of going for a walk together, of really sharing in all the ways that people can share when they're together. So I think that's a challenge. I think that everyone feels both that the video connection is good for some things, but not for all forms of communication. And that after a while, as I say, it becomes much less appealing. It's not very much fun because many of us are spending altogether too much time already online. So I think that's been one of the challenges, that in principle, people want to connect when they do get a chance to be together face to face, or when they can share a really important experience together, then it does make a strong connection. But just being told, come to a meeting online, I think is not the most exciting thing for most people. What maybe is important is when people do make that connection or devote that time, and when people tell important personal stories about the successes they've had with the program or the challenges they faced personally and with the people that they're working with, then I think people begin to feel a sense of connection. And so I think we have continued to build the network despite all the challenges of having to do everything right now through video conferencing and tools like that.
Folks, this is all for today. You can hear the following LTOA discussion about research, ethics and positionality during the COVID-19 pandemic by clicking on the next episode. You can also check out our description for the resources mentioned in the video. Thank you for listening to this episode. We would love to hear from our listeners. How did the COVID-19 pandemic impact your organization? How did you maintain your community of practice? Let us know in the comments below. I would like to shout out to Jeff Wells, who composed the music of the podcast specially for us. And many thanks to the LTOA team for their support in this endeavor. Join us on this journey and stay tuned for new episodes soon. Don't forget to keep up to date with LTOA news by checking out our website www.mcgill.ca/mhp or following us on Facebook and Instagram. And lastly, don't forget to follow, like and share this second episode. See you soon!